Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast, your source for all things bourbon. Join your hosts, Mark and Matt, as they drink and review bourbons, share news about upcoming events, interview the who's who in the bourbon world, and, most importantly, bring you along for the fun of living the bourbon life. Now, here's your hosts, Mark and Matt.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me, as always, is my good friend, Matt. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing great, man. How are you doing?
I am doing spectacular. You know, today was Monday. It was a holiday for me, a holiday for you as well, right?
That's right. It was a holiday today.
Yeah. So we each got a day off of regular work, which was really nice to have, and kind of slide right into the evening and record, drink some whiskey with friends. That's a good way to spend your day, right?
I could get used to something like this. We gotta figure this out a little bit better.
We can just not work during the day and then record podcasts and drink whiskey at night. I'm kind of liking that. I think that would work for me.
Yeah, I'm sure your wife would love that too.
Well, when we had some snow here in Lexington this week, that was kind of nice. It wasn't a lot, but at least we kind of get into that winter scene here. So we had some nice white stuff flowing.
Yeah, it was at least nice to see something make snow of the cold weather out here rather than just having the cold.
Man, I tell you, Matt, those days are just when it's just drizzly or just cloudy, like over and over and over, and it's 35 degrees. It kind of gets a little monotonous and
it's like that perpetual 5 p.m. every day, all day.
Yeah, no doubt, man. All right. Well, I tell you what, we should probably get into our show here. Just gonna be, but we should probably thank our sponsors. I always forget to do that. And we thank our Barrel Society members with their birthdays. Last week we did not have any birthdays, and actually this week we don't have any birthdays either. So kind of a surpriser there. But we'll get to our sponsors with the Stave Restaurant out in Millville, Kentucky. We love what they're doing out there. Rebecca and Eric Burnworth that own it are just wonderful people. They're great supporters of ours. They've been with us since day one. So we really appreciate all that they do. They are temporarily closed down. They're doing some renovations out there, making some changes, I think, to the menu and stuff. So they should be reopened the first week of February, I believe, is when it's going to be. So make sure that if you're here in Kentucky, if you're on the Bourbon Trail, they are located out there on McCracken Pike, right between Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve. So they're really conveniently located, really close to Frankfort, Buffalo Trace. So check those guys out if you're here in February. Again, you can check them out online at thestavekentucky.com. Then also 3 Chord Bourbon, our newest sponsor. We really appreciate all that they do for us as well. Ari Sussman, the master blender there, master distiller, just a great group of people, great guy. And they're doing some really incredible stuff. So if you're not familiar with 3 Chord, you can go back and check out the Bourbon Life Podcast episode we did with them several months back. Gosh, Matt, I don't even remember what month that was. That was a while. That was a while back, wasn't it?
That was like beginning season 1.
Yeah, March or April, somewhere around there, wasn't it? Yeah. So, But go back and check them out. But 3chordbourbon.com, you can check them out online as well. And just really, really good people doing some really great stuff up there in Michigan, the land of Matt. So
yeah, the land of snow.
There you go, the land of snow. All right, Matt, with that said, you want to tell everybody who we have with us tonight?
I would love to, Mark. Joining us this evening for us, whenever it is for you all, on the Bourbon Life Podcast, we have the founders of Lost Lantern Whiskey, Nora Ganley-Roper and Adam Polonski. Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure.
Well, we're really happy to have you all on, and I'm so happy. I noticed you both smiled and gave thumbs up because Matt got your names right.
Yeah, this is like the biggest part of the podcast is done for me. Let's get on to it from here. I've said my little part. I didn't screw it up, so it's going to be a good one.
You can just relax and drink some whiskey now.
That's right. Yeah. The one time that Matt really butchered a name, it was because I told him how it was supposed to be pronounced.
Yeah, Mark totally teed me up wrong for one of them. It looked like a horse's rear end.
So we always like to make sure before we get live, or not live, before we get on the show, that we've got our guest names correct. So Matt, you killed it tonight, man.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Great job. Well, Nora and Adam, we appreciate you all being with us. We've had this on the schedule for quite a while, actually. couple months, I believe.
Yeah.
So I've been really looking forward to this. And you've got some good stuff for us to be sampling on tonight. So we appreciate that. But before we jump in, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we tell everybody first what we're going to drink in this first session, and then we can come back. We can start talking and sharing some stories and jumping into the questions and stuff. But would you all like to tell everybody what we have poured up for our first drink tonight?
Sounds good. So our first release is Lost Lantern American Vatted Malt, edition number 1. It's our flagship release, and it is a blend of 6 American single malts from all around the country that we created collaboratively with the distilleries involved.
Yeah. 12 barrels, 6 distilleries.
Yeah.
And we actually got all of the distillers from those distilleries with us in a room, and we put together the blend together collaboratively, which is not something that people normally do. There are a lot of logistics that go into it, but it was really fun because we actually, to kick off the Lost Lantern project, we spent 8 months on the road visiting distilleries all over the US. And this collaborative blending project was something that came out of many different discussions with people who were super jealous of us being able to work with whiskey from many different distilleries. So we brought everyone together to do this project, and it was 1 day of blending, which was crazy. But each of the distillers handpicked barrels to bring to the blending session, which means we got some barrels that we would never have gotten our hands on otherwise. Because when you're showing up with your peers, you want to wow them with your whiskey, and so we got. I'm sure you have or either online or on paper, some of the barrel details. We generally send that out, the kind of 3-page everything, and you'll see the range of different types of barrels that go into this. But it's all single malt. We call it a vatted malt because of the tradition in Scotland of calling blends of single malt only vatted malt. It's an old term that's no longer used, but we liked the idea of bringing back that tradition.
Well, that's what. I was going to ask you about that. The vatted malt. So just so people understand. Well, first of all, the proof on this one. It's 105 proof is the sample that we got. So that is. So all the bottles on this release they're at 105 proof. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But now, like you said, so the vatted malt. That's just a term that's been used from I guess yesteryear, olden days, maybe. That you've kind of rekindled, because I wondered if there was a significance to that, because it's not something as a bourbon and rye drinker. When I saw that, I thought, what does that mean? What does vatted mean? So.
Yeah. So Scotland has always had a rich tradition of single malts and also blending them, and up until like 2005, 2006, I think that those blends were called vatted malts, and they retired the name. So for us, it's a little nod to that tradition and saying like, you gave up this great name, so we're going to use it over here now.
We'll steal it and use it. And it also, in Scotland, it meant that there was no grain whiskey. It was just single malt. And we also like bringing that to the US because with label laws here, if you call something a blend, there are other things that can go into it. You can have additives, you can have coloring, stuff like that. So we wanted to, for the Scotch nerds, we felt like it was a nice nod to them in the naming.
Yeah. And for American whiskey nerds, this blend is different than you would get in Scotland. It has a lot of new American oak casks in it, so we think it's a good balance between more traditional Scottish flavors and what we see in American whiskey all around the country. So I'm curious what you as bourbon guys think of it.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because we are the Bourbon Life, so we are mostly bourbon, bourbon and rye. So for us, when we do this, so real quick with the name itself, it's a vatted malt. So you refer to single malt. Now there's a lot of, bourbon and rye drinkers out there that are not clued in. Mm-hmm. Well, I shouldn't say not clued in, but that just don't understand what that term single malt, what that really means in terms of a whiskey. Can you guys speak to that and fill us in on that?
Yeah. So, as I'm sure everyone knows, bourbon is 51% corn, rye is 51% rye. Single malt is 100% malted barley. Can't have anything else in there. Malted means that it's heated up a little bit to cause the grain to start to germinate, which can then be used to in the fermentation process. It's the same reason there's malted barley in most bourbon and rye mash bills. And the single part means it's made at a single distillery. So single malt is single distillery, 100% malted barley. And this is the way they've been making whiskey in Scotland forever, but it's relatively new to the United States, only in the last couple decades. But there's some really fun stuff being made all around the country now.
Yeah. A fun kind of fact for whiskey nerds is single malt as a category in the US doesn't officially exist. So you'll see kind of weird labels where there's a group of single malt producers in the US that is working towards creating a category just like bourbon and rye that is very specific. We have malt whiskey here, which is the same kind of minimum 51% of that grain like bourbon or rye, but single malt, as Adam said, generally speaks to 100%. So having those kind of laws in place so people know when it says single malt on the bottle exactly what it means. But so ours is a vatted malt because we take single malts and we put them together.
Gotcha. So when you refer to malt, we're talking about barley, correct?
Barley,
I mean, this is not okay, because I know you can technically, I guess you can malt rye as well.
Yes. Yeah.
But this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about barley that's malted, that's turned into the whiskey. So, okay. Yeah. So we've clarified that for the bourbon, the corn and rye guys out there that are like, what? Wait a second. Hold on.
What is this? Yeah.
The other interesting thing is that unlike bourbon and rye, it doesn't have to be in new casks. It can be in both new and used and anything else you like. So this is a combination of a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
That brings other flavors in.
Historically in Scotland, it was mostly used casks. And so when we were thinking about how to make an American version of this, we think of the new oak that you get. Like when you think about bourbon and rye, all of that influence. So it was really important to us that some of the single malts that went into this had that new oak and have more of the vanilla character that you often don't find in an international single malt. And we think speaks to an American tradition, kind of brings the Scotch tradition and the bourbon tradition or rye tradition, just American whiskey, into this really interesting kind of combination. Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. Matt, what are you picking up over there on it? You've been nosing it for a little while. What you getting over there?
Yeah, it's what I'm getting is starting to make a lot of sense, Nora, especially based on what you were just saying with bringing in the new charred oak to this to add a little bit more of the barrel characteristics. Because at first I get like kind of a peaty, grassy nose, but then there was something bright coming through, like an orange or a citrus zest, and then I also smelled some leather and something sweet like butterscotch, and I think maybe some of that might be coming from the charred oak, and I'm picking up kind of those the sweeter butterscotch and maybe that leather from.
Yeah, it's funny you talked about the orange, Matt, because that was the one thing that stuck out to me was a citrus, and I was like, okay, is it orange? Is it something else, some other combination of citrus? And as soon as you said orange, I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's I could land on orange and agree and feel comfortable with that conclusion. So going back to you all individually, can you kind of tell us a little bit about who you all are, what you all do, how you got involved in the whiskey industry, and what really kind of led you all to the point of starting Lost Lantern?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start in a little bit on what we are and what we do. So we're Lost Lantern. We're an American independent bottler. That means we don't own a distillery. We don't ever plan to own a distillery. That we're not distillers. But what we do is hunt down unique casks from all around the country and put together both blends and single cask releases with full transparency on where it came from. So I told you that American Vatted Malt has whiskey from 6 distilleries in it, and all 6 of them are right on the front label.
And the back label. Wherever you're looking on the bottle, you see who worked with us. Yeah, where that whiskey's coming from.
Yeah. So this is a nod, again, to Scottish tradition, but is really pretty new to American whiskey. In Scotland, there have been independent bottlers for 200 years who do exactly what we do. They're buying casks from around the country. They create their own blends and they put out single casks. And that's often the only way to get whiskey from some distilleries. And for us, we thought there was room for this here because there are so many distilleries all around the country right now that a lot of them are really small and they're maybe only distributed locally or just aren't really well known yet, or they have a local or a fan base, but all the rest of the bourbon community doesn't know about them yet. So for us, it's a way to highlight places we think are making really good whiskey all around the country.
So you don't have to sift through the 2,000 different whiskey producers that are out there, because who has the time or money for that? So the idea is that we do all of that kind of sifting and then bring things that we think are super delicious forward so that people can try them and try new distilleries with confidence about what's in the bottle.
Yeah. And
it's funny. I was reading through your stuff that you all had sent with the samples, and I saw that information about 2,000 different producers, and and it struck me as I really had to stop, and I was like, wait, what? There's how many?
I know, it's crazy.
Yeah, I had no honestly, because bourbon and rye here in Kentucky, and we're starting obviously to see the increase in those distillers as well here in Kentucky, but 2,000. I mean, honestly, I would have had no idea that there are that many different distillers across our country, and you guys obviously had visited quite a few of those. And I'm sure we could talk about that. But in terms of where you all came from individually, from experience wise and stuff, can you guys tell us a little bit about how you guys, where you were from and what your background was?
Yeah, totally. So my whiskey experience, I actually come in from the wine side. I worked at Astor Wines and Spirits in New York City, so great whiskey store. I came in to be a wine salesperson and then got promoted to be a sales manager and had to manage people on all sides, and realized very quickly that I had to learn a lot about spirits, because that was not a place that I knew much about. So I spent a lot of my tenure there, 2.5 years, studying whiskey and really falling in love with whiskey and getting a chance to try a whole range of things, and got really excited about American whiskey, like bourbon, but also people that are doing things outside of where a lot of people think of things coming from. Single malt that doesn't come from Scotland, bourbon that doesn't necessarily come from Kentucky, because it's a wild west out there of so many different things. So got really excited there. And then I actually left to work at startups for a while because I knew I wanted to be in the industry, and realized that if I was going to start a business or work at an early stage business, I should learn how to run a business on someone else's dime. So I was doing that when he came to me with this idea. So I'll let you talk about kind of what you were doing and how you came up with the idea for the business.
Yeah. So I am a whiskey journalist. I've been writing about spirits for like 7 years now. Most recently at Whiskey Advocate, where I was one of the senior whiskey specialists, and I was actually one of the reviewers for American whiskey. With my personal focus was on craft whiskey, so whiskey from all around the United States. And what I saw there was that exactly what our idea became: is there are so many distilleries around the country that I had never even heard of, that even other whiskey people I knew hadn't heard of, and it was really good. And there's stuff out there that's really good. Some craft whiskey, like, people have some preconceived notions about what it can be, but there's stuff out there that's really good right now. And I really wanted to show that off, and thought of this model. I was writing a story about Scotch independent bottlers and was like, wait, this is exactly what we need over here. We could do this here. But it didn't start out that way. It started out as, somebody's going to start an independent bottler over here someday. It makes a ton of sense. And then 6 months later, it was like, someone's going to do this really soon. This whiskey's getting really good and nobody knows about it. And then 6 months after that, it became, nobody started it yet. Why hasn't anybody started it yet? Oh, we should start it. We have the background, we have the connections, we know the people who are making these whiskeys, and we have really good palates, we think. And that's what kicked it all off.
Yeah. And we do, for what it's worth, we think this is the independent bottling space. Is there's some other people working on it now, and we think it'll become a really robust part of the American whiskey scene in a decade, probably.
That's what I was going to ask you, because you guys started this, I guess, was it 2018? Is that right? Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
So you're kind of first in that space almost. I mean, it seems like you're really at least one of the innovators in that space. But I'm sure there's probably other people now that have seen what you're doing and have slowly starting to stick their toes in the water to see what's up. So you're aware, I guess there are competitors then, like you said, that are starting to pop up.
And we think it's a good thing, because there is some education to go into, because we're bringing something from Scotland here and applying it not just to single malt, but to bourbon and rye. So the more people that are doing this, the better. And also we have to educate the distillers about what it is and convince them to sell us whiskey. And if we walk in and we say we're an independent bottler and they know what that means, then that makes the job of finding the whiskey a lot easier.
Yeah, I'd say. So now on this particular bottle, the Vatted Malt edition #1, you worked with 6 different distilleries, right? So who all did you have involved in that project?
Yeah. So the 6 distilleries are Balcones in Waco, Texas, Copperworks in Seattle, Washington, Santa Fe Spirits in Santa Fe, New Mexico, 888 on the island of Nantucket in Massachusetts, Virginia Distillery Company in Virginia, and Westward in Portland, Oregon. And they all make American single malt, but the great thing about American single malt is it can be made in a number of different ways. So there's a wide variety of styles in here, from peated whiskey to mesquite smoked whiskey to all kinds of cask types and fun stuff like that, and all around the country too.
I was
all
reading
around the country. No kidding. You certainly didn't make it easy on yourselves to
and it's
pull samples from all over the place. That's like incredibly impressive that not only are you doing this with 6 different distilleries, you're doing it in multiple different time zones with people all over what a job to try to organize and get everything together. That's super cool.
Yeah, it's great.
It's definitely an exciting challenge, and Nora did most of the heavy lifting in terms of figuring out physically how to move barrels from New Mexico to Virginia.
Getting barrels off of Nantucket is probably the hardest thing that I've had to do so far.
It's an island with pretty stormy seas and no bridges, so that whiskey came over on a ferry.
Moving a barrel in bond, just making sure that we follow the laws. Yeah.
So now you can say it's also been ocean aged, right?
That's true.
You can just throw that in. Just, hey, if you do that for marketing, just give me some credit on that, okay? So you've got an ocean aged cask now that's involved in your single malt. So, but that is really cool. I mean, I love the story. I love what you guys are doing. And Matt and I, the one thing we've really learned, I think, on the show over the last year is that there are a lot, and again, the focus for us again is on bourbon and rye, but we have learned there are so many different distilleries out there. I'm a Kentuckian through and through, born and raised. So, bourbon and Kentucky is kind of synonymous to me, and it's dear to my heart. But with that said, there are so many different distilleries out there that are making so many good whiskeys. And we focus on bourbon and rye, but it's really been eye-opening, I think, for us, just from that perspective, to see what all these people are doing, across the country. And you all obviously having more inside information and having been in the industry longer and getting to know these people, visiting all these distilleries. It's really cool that you guys have taken it, to a business model and really starting to see the success and the fruits of your labor. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
And we decided early on that we would only ever buy whiskey from distilleries we had visited in person. So we have to have actually gone out there, even if it's on Nantucket. And
in the winter. Yeah. But it's important because we want to make sure that if we're saying this was made in this type of still by this person, that we see that the still is hooked up and that everyone's doing everything that they say, and we are excited about their story and they're excited to work with us. So it's part of kind of creating that long-term partnership with a lot of these distilleries.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. And then getting back to this one, Matt, going back to the palate on it and the finish on it, what are you getting on that?
The palate for me, I get just an explosion of, I think to me, it tastes like apricot. I get a lot of apricot and that orange citrus, and then it's got a nice little spice to it. I know it's barley, and I'm trying to compare it to a rye just because I have a lot of experience with rye, but I know it's not the same, but it's got a nice little kick to it. Just some spice on the tongue as well.
Yeah. There's a sweetness to it. And to me, I guess I pick up, I want to say it's a peatiness to it, and I'm not a Scotch guy, so I don't know, but my experience with Scotch, it's just not something I drink. And the Scotch that I've had that's been peated, I've not been a huge fan of, just because of that flavor. And initially I detected that, but it's funny, like Matt said, that gives way to a sweetness. That orange, that citrusy comes through as well. And then that spiciness, that's what I think really shocked me, was the fact that on the palate towards the back, that I start getting a lot of spiciness, almost like not a cinnamon, but more of almost like a peppercorny type of, or even baking spice type of taste on the palate. And then it really carries over into the finish. So that initial, what I call peatiness, and it may not be peatiness, but that's just what, in my mind, what I associate it to, that I initially get, it quickly dissipated and it didn't linger. Whereas with the scotches I've had in the past that have that peatiness to it, it seems like that is so dominant that it overtakes the palate completely and it just lingers. And even on the finish, that's all I get. But this is totally different. Completely different than that. So it's very, very nice the way it's blended together. So I can see where you get that maltiness, but I pick up almost like a little bit of kind of a chocolatey almost on the finish as well. And I guess that's maybe from the barley. It seems like the things that have higher barley content, the bourbons that we've had, or the other whiskeys that we've had that have that higher barley. Matt, do you pick up any at all? Do you detect any like cocoa-y, chocolatey type of flavor to that?
Yeah, I wasn't getting any cocoa or chocolate on the finish, but I keep like kind of going back, and as I'm like licking the roof of my mouth, I'm getting more of that orange, and I'm getting vanilla, like a really strong, late lingering vanilla on the finish. And I think that's like kind of some of the heat that you were talking about, Mark. It's not a cinnamon. It's like a sharp, really like a punchy heat, and then that vanilla as well with the orange or apricot.
Yeah,
is what I was picking up.
So from a Scotch perspective, because again, I don't drink Scotch. Would that not? I mean, vanilla, because it's imparted from the oak, from the barrels. Is that something that people would actually ever pick up in a Scotch at all? I mean, is a vanilla a taste? I don't know, Nora, Adam. I mean, is that something that would come through at all? Or
I would say that, yeah, that like people get flavor notes from everything, but vanilla is definitely more associated with bourbon than with Scotch. Yeah. But in part that's because of the barrels. That vanilla flavor comes from the new charred oak, and this has not all new charred oak, but a lot of new charred oak in it. So it's totally from that.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm really surprised. I really am. I was because I'm thinking, man, this is going to be like a Scotch, and I'm just not going to be a fan of it. But I'm surprised that I really like this. Yeah. And I really like the way this finishes. Like Matt said, I love that lingering, that sweetness that I get, the oranginess, but I get that chocolatey, the spiciness. And like Matt says, well, I mean, it surprises me because it finishes to me almost like a rye whiskey with that spiciness. So I really enjoy it. Matt, what do you think on that?
I agree with you, Mark, and Nora and Adam. I got to ask, what did you all have any expectations, or what did you think during this process? Because you're pulling in 12 barrels from 6 different distilleries from different corners of the U.S. Some had oak, new charred oak. Some you said might have been in smoked mesquite. If they're up in Santa Fe, they might have been up at altitude, so different climates. Like, you're getting so much different characteristics in each barrel. I guess you probably couldn't go into it with too much as far as expectations are in the way.
Yeah. No idea. It could have gone horribly, horribly wrong because you never know. I mean, we did do some tests of flavors because no one, to our knowledge, had ever blended peated single malt with mesquite smoked single malt. And we realized we had no idea if those flavors could even play well together. So before inviting everyone, we actually did pretty extensive tests to figure out what ratios work. And what we realized is you really can't do even parts. If you do half peated mesquite or peated single malt and half mesquite smoked, they cancel out and you basically get nothing, or you get something really bad. So when we were putting this together, we actually have 2 of the single malt barrels are made with mesquite smoked barley, and then 1 is made with peated barley. And so that ratio of 2 to 1 works out really well without overpowering with smoke, which is what you were talking about, where we wanted it to be lightly smoked. But yeah, I mean, one of the other things we did was when everything was put in the vat together, was about 120 proof. And in order to allow the flavors to integrate, excuse me, we actually spent 3 months slow proofing it down to 105. So I think because there are so many disparate flavors, when we first started, it was jagged and you could taste all of them, but they weren't really working well together. So 3 months, I mean, is a really, really long time to be waiting for your whiskey to be ready. But we think that's really the only way that such a range of flavors would end up working well together. And that's why all of our other stuff right now is cask strength. But we knew that wouldn't work for this because we needed that period of adding the water and bringing the flavors together. Yeah.
We figure 105 is still pretty good for most people, though.
Yeah. That's right in my wheelhouse. I'm thrilled with that. So, well, guys, we ran over just a little bit, but it was really cool to get all the information about that. And I'm good with that. Like we said before we started, we say 20-minute segments, but we never hold true to that. But I think what we'll do, let's take a little quick break, and then we can move on to the next one. But before we wrap up this session, anything else you guys want to add on this malt whiskey before we move on?
I think that's it for now, but your reaction is what we hope for, because it's not supposed to taste like a Scotch malt whiskey. It's supposed to taste like an American single malt whiskey or a blend of them. So
and we hope it's a gateway into some of the American single malts for bourbon and rye drinkers for sure.
I think that would be, we talk about that a lot of times with the ryes and the bourbons we taste that are, entry points into the bourbon and ryes that Matt and I would enjoy. That there's bourbons and ryes out there that are a nice jumping off point for people that want to start that experience. So I can definitely see where this would be. And this is something I would drink. And I wouldn't normally just drink a regular Scotch. I'm just going to, that's just not my it's not my thing.
Your taste.
It's not, but this is something that I would really drink and I would enjoy drinking this.
Yeah. So. Mark, I think, and not to take us any longer over here, but I think you're going right on there as a non-Scotch drinker myself. This is really nice because I'm able to taste some of the things that I find similar and comforting in a bourbon or a rye in this product as well. So for someone who doesn't have a whole lot of experience drinking Scotch, and it's not entirely my favorite, there are a lot of notes in this that really hit home. And I think this really is a good segue to get into it.
Yep, I would agree with that. All right, great. Well, with that said, let's take a quick break, get a word from our sponsor, and we'll be back in just a minute with more with Nora and Adam from Lost Lantern Whiskey. So everybody just sit tight.
Hey, Bourbon Lifers. When you're out hunting for those hard-to-find bottles or just enjoying the distilleries of Central Kentucky, you're going to work up an appetite. And when it's time to refuel, we suggest that you visit our good friends Rebecca and Eric Burnworth at the Stave Restaurant. Located at 5711 McCracken Pike in Millville, Kentucky, close to Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve, the Stave Restaurant is just off the beaten path, nestled on the banks of Glens Creek. Chef Jonathan Sanning prepares amazing food each day featuring an elevated Kentucky-inspired cuisine. You can take our word for it, the food alone is worth the trip to the Stave. With a full-service bar, great bourbon flights, and signature cocktails, the Stave is the perfect place to catch up with friends after a fun-filled day of touring the local distilleries. And you can even purchase bottles of bourbon to take home with you while you're there. Make sure to follow the Stave on Instagram and Facebook at The Stave Kentucky, or visit them online at thestavekentucky.com to stay up to date on everything that's going on. The Stave Restaurant is a bourbon lover's paradise, right here in the heart of bourbon country.
All right, everybody, welcome back for round and/or session 2, whichever you prefer to call it, of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me, as always, is my good buddy, my friend. He's still with me over here, Matt. How you doing over there?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing great. You are right, man. Season 2, I'm still here. You're still here. For some reason, we're still here. We're back, in fact.
I know. Yeah. Season 2, episode 4.
Stronger than ever.
That's right, man. We're rolling. We are rolling. So having a really good time tonight too, man. So
yeah, no kidding. We're here with Nora and Adam, the founders of Lost Lantern Whiskey, and they threw us a little curveball on our first session here. We started with a little vatted malt whiskey, which is out of the wheelhouse for Mark and I. And I think now we're going to hopefully bring it back to something that maybe we know a touch more about. So I don't know if you all, Adam and Nora, want to let us know what we've got poured up here for session number 2.
Me? Okay. Yeah. So we have a rye, hallelujah, for session number 2. But of course, it's not going to be straightforward. It's never straightforward because we're trying to find the things that are a little off the beaten path. So this is actually a rye from Brooklyn, New York Distilling Company. It is, and we have a cheat sheet because I'm blanking on the mash bill. It is 75% rye, 13% corn, and 12% malted barley. It was aged in new oak for 3 years. And then for a year and a little bit, it then went into an cask that previously held apple brandy. So even though it's rye, it's not totally straightforward rye. But we think it's a really nice kind of hearkening back to cool climate rye. So it's not going to taste like a Kentucky rye. It's going to be a different beast, but we think it's a really interesting perspective, and we're interested for you guys to taste it.
Yeah. Well, and before you get into that, I'll just say, this is cask strength, right?
Yes.
So it's 119.2, I think is what our sample bottle said. So we jumped up in proof, which makes me happy. And Matt is a rye guy over there, so he's smiling already. So he's gonna be digging it. So Matt, what are you picking up on this one?
It's got a really soft nose. I was expecting, especially at the proof, to get a little bit more heat on the nose, but that it's really soft and well balanced. I'm not getting a whole ton of rye spice.
Yeah. And that's what kind of surprised me, because, well, the mash bill, when you said that, it kind of surprised me as well, just because I think from my perspective, we think of like a Kentucky rye, and I call them barely legal because they're like 51% rye. They're just at that threshold, and then they pump in a bunch of corn and add the malted barley. So it's almost, like a high rye bourbon for a lot of people. I mean, it's just a little bit higher edge on the rye, but it's still pretty close to a bourbon because you got so much corn in it. But then you got the contrary, coming out of Indiana, you get those 95.5 ryes that are, going to kick you in the face with that rye spiciness. But the only other person, I think Pinhook, Matt, their rye was like a 60% rye or something. So it was a little bit higher than a Kentucky rye, but it wasn't a 95. It was just kind of an odd combination of a mash bill. So when you said that, would you say 73 rye?
75% rye.
75. Yeah. So that's almost, it sounds like almost like a bourbon mash bill where you'd have 75 corn, and then the other percentages rye and malted barley. So interesting. So I was expecting, like Matt said, to take that nose and get that really instant, like high rye kind of spiciness. But like Matt said, to me, it's mellowed out. You get that spiciness, but it's not overwhelming at all. It's very nice. Matt, what else you get on that?
Gosh, it's hard. And it's hard for me to describe because I like the nose so much because it's just got a really, really inviting smell. There's not one really flavor that's jumping out really heavily toward me. I get some of the apple. There's like a touch of cinnamon. There's something sweet coming through, like a honey or some sort of a syrup in there. A little touch of vanilla, maybe like a little bit of graham cracker, but it's just got a really, really great nose. I really, really like the nose.
we think our philosophy about, or our hypothesis about why it's so gentle is that apple brandy, because when you think about cider, it's so sweet and you get some of that syrupy, and we found that because we've tasted stuff that's not finished as well as the finished stuff, and we find that it's just softer, and the brandy brings that in. And it's also worth, as a side note, the one thing I didn't mention about this is part of our single cask program. So it's just one cask. This one is, how many bottles did we make? 202 bottles. So these are all just one cask, one and done.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, but I'm kind of surprised. Well, it's 4 years total, right? Because you said 3 years in the cask. And was it American oak, or what was the?
They were new oak. Yeah.
New oak. Okay. And then onto the apple brandy. And it's funny, Matt, because you said apple, and I swear I picked up apple, but just before you said that, but then I didn't want to be like, yeah, but it's just because it's apple brandy doesn't mean you're going to actually pick up apple.
Yeah.
But honestly, I started to pick up apple on that. So I'm glad you said that. So I don't feel quite as far out there with that.
I want
So
like
what
some
was?
pie crust too. Sorry to interrupt. Like I just
No, you're fine.
the more I'm smelling it, it's coming alive a little bit more, but it's very gentle. But I'm like getting apple pie, like a pie crust on it as well.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I have Matt. Matt picks up all these things. That's why Matt's here. You know. So, plus that golden voice, Matt's golden voice that gets us through. But very good at detecting these notes on these different whiskeys that we taste. So for me, it's like, yes, it's sweet, but I did pick up that apple. What on the palate, Matt? What were you getting on that?
The palate has let's see. More of that rye is coming through on the palate. It's got a really, really nice finish, nice heat to it. And that I'm picking up the cinnamon a little bit on the finish, a little like nutmeg or clove as well. And
it's funny because you were talking about the softness on the nose, and then I took my first sip and I was like, oh crap, there's the rye. I mean, it was like I could, you get that instant spiciness from the rye. And again, it wasn't overwhelming, but it was just kind of funny because from the nose, talking about the sweetness and the mildness of it, and then you take that first sip. At least for me, Matt, I don't know, did the rye kind of did you notice that, or was it just me?
It's coming alive, man. That finish too. Wow, that's got a great, nice rye spice that picking up a bunch of the cinnamon, again, like clove, baking spices on the end. That apple is coming through, like the last little bit, like apple cider coming down where that sediment is, all the good stuff.
Yeah.
I like that. We might have to steal that.
There you go. Just give Matt credit. No, so now, how was it that you decided? Because you visited 100 different distilleries or more.
Yeah.
So what was it that made you say, all right, we're going to work with these people for the single malt, and we're going to do this combination. And now for this rye, we're going to pick New York Distilling. We're going to pick them, and we're going to work with them specifically on this single cask rye. How'd that?
Yeah. So for our first lineup of single casks, we really wanted to come out with whiskeys that both that we think are really delicious, but are also a little different than what you would normally expect from like a Kentucky bourbon or a Kentucky or Indiana rye. And we definitely think, just like what you guys are saying, that New York Distilling Company is a little different from that. There's also a soft spot because we both lived in Brooklyn for quite a long time. We spent most of our 20s there, and this was our neighborhood distillery, and the founder.
Yeah, this was the first distillery that said yes when we asked them to sell us barrels. So it was important to us that they were part of the initial single cask lineup. We do so the American Vatted Malt. The goal is for it to come out on an annual basis. We actually had our second blending session set up for March, and that got messed up by the pandemic. Surprise, surprise, just like everything else. That will be started over again once we are able to get people into the same room. But the single casks, we are going to be releasing single casks roughly quarterly, and we'll generally have a single malt, a bourbon, and a rye. So we picked, as Adam was saying, we picked the first lineup to show some range, along with these, the two that we're tasting with you two. We also have a corn whiskey from Iron Root and a single malt from Santa Fe Spirits. So kind of a range of flavors, and we will change the profiles and the distilleries that we're working from and the areas of the country that we're working with over the quarterly release cadence. So
gotcha. So now when you're going for this ride, did you have something then in mind? I mean, obviously you had the relationship.
Yeah.
So that meant something, but from a flavor profile, like Matt was talking about earlier, with the malt, there was really no way that you're going to be able to know, with 12 barrels from 6 distilleries, what you're going to end up with. But with a rye, I mean, you're familiar with the product somewhat. Did you say this is really kind of the profile we want to go with, or we just want to sample some barrels and pick what really appeals to us?
So we knew that we wanted a cool climate rye because we think that's really interesting. Now most rye is made down in your neck of the woods, but 150 years ago it was mostly made in the Northeast, in Pennsylvania, and a lot in Maryland too, and in New York. and it's a slightly different flavor profile. But we didn't go in knowing we wanted something with an apple brandy finish. What we like to do when we talk to distilleries, we handpick every one of our barrels with working with them on it, and we basically tell them, like, send us some of your stuff that tastes like your flagship release that can introduce it to people who don't know it, and then send us some fun things that are a little different and surprise us. We don't like to dictate, like, send us exactly this, and this. They know their warehouse way better than we ever will. And
generally, yeah, distillers will have a few barrels that they've tucked away that are so good that they don't want to put it in a blend and lose that palate. So we're actually a great outlet for them on that. Yeah.
And this was one of those. We went there looking for a straight rye, and then they sent us some straight rye finished in an apple brandy cask, and then we tasted it and we said,
okay,
all right, we're doing that.
Yep, we're in.
Yeah. So was this something on their end? Was this something that was kind of just more experimental for them, or was this something that they do on a regular basis? I mean, did they release their own rye finished in an apple brandy cask, or is it something that
they do? It's not at cask strength.
Okay, gotcha.
And this was one of their earlier experiments with doing that. They've changed their mash bill a little bit since then to be an Empire rye, which is a style that's specific to New York State, and has to be made from 100% New York State grains and has particular requirements for the barrel entry proof and things like that.
Gotcha.
So this was when they first started that experiment. So we got one of their older barrels that had the apple brandy finish, and that's fun for us too.
Yeah. So how long have they been around? Because I don't know. I mean, I hate to say it, I don't know anything about New York distilling. I mean, like you said, there's 2,000 different distilleries
Exactly.
out there. So,
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what we're here for. So they're around 10 years old now.
Okay.
It's two founders. One of them, the one that we personally know best, was also the founder of the Brooklyn Brewery. Back in the 80s, I think. And he started that in Williamsburg way back in the day. And then after he left that, then said, oh, I think distilling is the next big thing. And got involved with a New York Distilling Company. So that's their story. They've been around about 10 years.
Yeah, I was trying to look it up, but it doesn't say.
Yeah.
On their
You know,
website.
it's funny because, like I said earlier, Matt and I, we didn't come in with preconceived ideas about different distilleries, but I'm from Kentucky, and obviously I think bourbon Kentucky. But we've had a couple of different people on from New York, and we've both been extremely, I would say, impressed. We had Widow Jane. They're in Brooklyn, I guess, right? Is that right, Matt? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I think you froze. I think everything froze up there for just a second on my end. So, but then we had Widow Jane, and then we also had Taconic. And they were just outside. I think Taconic's just a little bit outside of the city, if I remember correctly. So, there's obviously some really good things that are coming out of New York. And it's funny when you say rye whiskey, people don't think, oh, New York. But I mean, this is really good. I'm really, really enjoying this. Matt, what else are you picking up on this one on the palate on it?
The palate, again, it's got the heat's coming through from the higher proof. But I think it's also just got a whole lot of flavor. The apple from, I think the brandy is coming through, but it might even just have an apple note to it regardless. And then the baking spices are in there, like the brown and the pie baking spices, that little bit of, it really does have an apple pie note to it. It's got the baking spices in there. It's got some sort of like the pie crust I think I'm getting from the grain. The apple is on there. And then it's just got this really, really great finish that's just really warm and long on the tongue. And this is really good. The nose on it too keeps opening up. And
Matt's going to need a bottle. Matt's our rye guy here. So
I do. And I love an East Coast rye. No doubt about that. I appreciate all the different aspects of rye that we've had, from the 95.5s to the barely legal Kentuckys. And there's something about an East Coast rye. I really, really enjoy a lot of the flavor I get from them.
So is that like East Coast, West Coast thing where you throw up a few gang signs and, your East Coast rye versus West Coast? Is this like a whole thing now we're going to have here?
I love them all.
Stay out of it.
We're not touching
Yeah,
that.
you're wise, Adam. Don't get Mark started on this one.
Well, it's just really cool what you all have done, because the model for a lot of newer companies that are popping up is go out, find the distilleries that have barrels, buy those barrels, bring them back, either blend them themselves or even release them as a single cask or whatever, but put it under their own label and not really have much information about where, what it is, where it's come from. And you all are just like 180 from that. So that's extremely unique. So, I mean, what made you all say, hey, this is going to be a great idea? We're going to rebottle. We're going to use our name, Lost Lantern, but we're going to just put the names of all the distilleries on there. I mean, that's just something that you just don't see. So,
I mean, I think it comes kind of from what you're saying is we were both in the industry. We saw the places that were doing what you're saying. And it's like, why don't you just talk about where it comes from? If you have great whiskey, talk about it and say why. And that's what we wanted to do. Like for us, the whole point is serving as a discovery mechanism and showing off a great whiskey and telling you where it came from. And then maybe next time you see a New York Distilling Company on the shelf somewhere, you see their Ragtime Rye, you're like, oh, I had the really good Lost Lantern release. I'll try this too. And the fun part is when we first started, I thought it was going to be really hard to get distilleries to let us use their names. And most of them have been really excited about it. They're glad that someone wants to help them get their name out there in a slightly different way and talk about what they're doing and say that they're making great whiskey.
Yeah. And we only work with distilleries that we want to talk about and that we can sing their praises and we're super excited about. So that's part of our screening model as well, is making sure that we are excited about telling the story, but also from their perspective, it's like, okay, someone wants to go on a podcast and talk about how awesome our distillery is. Awesome. Yes, sure. Like, go for it. But yeah, the response from them has been great. And as whiskey nerds, our whole ethos is we're doing what we would have wanted to see on the shelf, and we didn't at the time. We started this, and we think that we just always go back to, there are 2,000 distilleries. Is any one person ever going to be able to find the stuff that they like? And unless there's something like us that allows people to easy access to distilleries that may not be distributed in their area of the country, or easy access to things that they may not have looked at because of labeling or name or who knows what. So that's the joy for us, is discovering things and telling everyone all about it.
Yeah, well, that's really cool that you all are able to give these distilleries a much louder and much larger reach of a voice, and to work with them and to expose their products to so many more people. I think that's really cool. I can tell you, I probably never would have tasted a New York apple brandy finished rye before tonight. And it's really cool. It's really unique. And what you're doing, it just seems really genuine from both of you, that it's something that you're passionate about, and you're giving just this great outlet for people that really deserve it to shine.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And I wish we could show everyone the labels, but when we talk about transparency, it means like their name is right under ours. We have our logo, and then it says exactly where it comes from.
I guess so you two can see it. It says, and we'll talk about it so other people can see it in their mind. It's our logo on top, and then the distillery name right below, and then some basic information about the release. And then on the back, it also says the distillery name and much more detail about it. But yeah, it is, transparency means full transparency with detailed barrel details and all of that, which will soon be on our website. As of February, we're doing a full website overhaul so that people can just go on our website and be as nerdy as they want to be on all of that.
Yeah, that's very cool. Well, I'll tell you what, we're actually at the end of round 2 already, believe it or not. So we'll close it up on this one. But final thoughts on the rye, Matt.
Oh yeah, 2 thumbs way up.
I'm just surprised that, it's funny because as I kept sipping on it, that the finish on it, that spice that just kept coming through, but there was a sweetness that was combined with it that just kept popping its head and like, oh, I'm sweet. And then it's like, no, I'm spicy. And it's like, no, I'm sweet. And it's like, no, I'm spicy. And that spice just kept on, and it's still continuing on my tongue, on the roof of my mouth. I can feel that. And it's not an overwhelming spiciness at all. It's a very nice, subtle spiciness that I really enjoy. So I'm with Matt on this one. 2 thumbs up, Matt. So Nora and Adam, final thoughts or anything else you want to say on this one before we wrap this session up?
I think we get the idea. New York Distilling Company, great cool climate rye.
Yeah. Now I think I was on their website earlier today or yesterday. Did they make a rockin' rye too? Did I see that, or do you guys know? I think.
Yep.
No way.
Yes.
This is the discovery we like to drive. That thrill when you're like, I've never heard of this place. Oh, they're doing all kinds of cool things.
Yeah. So we had the Family Jones, right, Matt?
Yeah, Family Jones, the automatic Jones rockin' rye.
Yeah, automatic. And Matt was like all about I didn't know anything about rockin' rye. Like I said, Kentucky guy, bourbon, okay, rye on the side, maybe a little bit. Rockin' rye. I'm like, what the hell is this? But my eyes were opened to the rockin' rye. But Matt, I saw that earlier on their website when I was on there checking them out, that they do have a rockin' rye, and I thought,
I'm going to check that out for certain.
I love it.
All right. Well, again, 2 thumbs up from both of us on this one. Very, very good rye, finished in that apple brandy cask. Very good. So let's take a break, get a word from our sponsor, and we'll be back with more with Adam and Nora from Lost Lantern Whiskey. Thanks.
Hey, Bourbon Lifers. We want to take just a second and tell you a little bit about 3 Chord Whiskey. 3 Chord's line of whiskeys embody the spirit of creativity. The whiskey is a true collaboration between producer and composer Neil Giraldo and master blender distiller Ari Sussman. The 3 Chord team of expert blenders, coopers, and sensory professionals have developed a multi-step process they call perfectly tuned taste. This process begins by carefully selecting the finest bourbon and rye whiskeys from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, and then blending them all together. After each blend is completed, the 3 Chord team then applies their proprietary process of pyrolysis, that's a lot to say, isn't it? Which involves heating American oak to precise temperatures to release specific flavor and aroma compounds. Then they use another proprietary method called rhythmic disruption process, and that's more than just playing music to a bunch of barrels, which integrates all of those related compounds into the blended spirit. Finally, each small batch blend of 3 Chord is evaluated by a trained sensory panel to ensure an uncommon depth of flavor, character, aroma, and a perfectly tuned taste in each bottle. With their introductory blended bourbon, their Amplify Rye, Strange Collaboration, which is a Pinot Noir finished Kentucky bourbon, their 94 rated 12-bar reserve, and the brand new highly coveted 15-year Kentucky bourbon they call the Whiskey Drummer, there's a lot of options available from 3 Chord. Like the feeling you get when you hear that perfect song, you'll know that the 3 Chord line of whiskeys are right from the first sip. They resonate with so much flavor, you'll want an encore. Find out more about 3 Chord whiskeys and distribution in your area at www.3chordbourbon.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back for the third and final session of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me, as always, is my toboggan beanie wearing buddy, Matt. Matt, you're wearing a toboggan, dude. I'm not lying to people. You wear it all the time. We're in my house. We're in my house. It's like 70 degrees, and you still got your boggin on, man. So, but that's okay.
Freezing in your house. I don't know what you're talking about.
All right, it's not 70. It's actually like 64 degrees in my house. I have to. That's my wife, man. That's not me.
I'm gonna start hacking into your thermostat here before our recording sessions.
Sorry about that, Matt. I hate that, but I'm happy you stuck around. I'm happy you haven't frozen to death over there.
That's right. My teeth haven't started chattering yet, but we are back as always for session number 3 of the Bourbon Life Podcast, and you all have made it this far. You best stick around for the exciting conclusion with Nora Ganley-Roper and Adam Polonski, the founders of Lost Lantern Whiskey, joining us. And we talked during the break. Usually we know, or we mention where everybody is, our guests are joining us from. And Mark and I are complaining about the cold. I imagine in rural upstate Vermont, it's a little colder.
It's a little colder. We have a lot of snow at this point. Like 1.5 feet is just chilling now for the rest of the season, probably.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, wow. Yeah. No thanks.
it's pretty.
It's really pretty, and the cows are still outside. They're going out there.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I just can't. Yeah. No, I like us. I was telling my wife today, for some reason in Kentucky now, it seems like we don't get much snow during the winter, but then when we get to March, we will always get one snow, like 7 to 10 inches in the first or second week of March. It almost always happens now. And then that's it. And 3 days later or 2 days later, it's melted because it's back in 50, 60 degrees and it's over with. So those are the kind of winters that I'm kind of partial to these days.
We might get back to 50 or 60 degrees by May if we're lucky.
Oh, man. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, might be able to put away your snowshoes by middle of April.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on with this round 3, do you all want to tell everybody what we've got poured up for this final session here?
I'll tell you, but I have some questions for you first.
Okay.
These are gimme questions. First off, what is bourbon mostly made from?
Corn.
Well, where does most corn come from?
The Midwest.
Corn stalks.
Corn stalks, that's right. Well, Kentucky definitely grows some corn. There's lots of cornfields down there, but the largest producer of corn in the country is Iowa, in the middle of the Great Plains. But until pretty recently, Iowa has never made bourbon. So for our first single cask bourbon release, we wanted to do an Iowa bourbon, and that's what we have. It's Cedar Ridge Distillery outside of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It's their bourbon that's made from the corn from their family farm, grown right in Iowa.
Very nice.
The mash bill, it's 74% corn that is from their family farm, and then 14% in malted rye and 12% malted barley. So a really unique mash bill as well.
Yeah, so it's malted rye and malted barley.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
And this also, cask strength, and that one's at, I think, 120.9 is what we have written down.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say this one jumps up just a touch.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. But Matt, what are you picking up on this?
It's got a really great nose of corn. It smells almost like a grain silo. Like really, there's the really freshness of corn on the nose of this. What do you have, Mark?
I'm picking up the sweetness of the corn. And I'm getting that, and I've talked about it before, Matt. The Topps baseball gum. Where you open up a pack of baseball cards and you get that sweet cornstarchy pink bubble gum stick that's in there. And as a kid, I obviously love that smell. That's another Bourbon Life bingo. I was telling you guys that before. So if I bring up the Topps baseball cards from my childhood, that's a bourbon. So you guys scored a Bourbon Life bingo on that one. But yeah, so I pick up the sweetness on that. So obviously you said 74 corn, was that right? Or am I missing that? Yeah. 74. So yeah. So I pick up that sweetness, the corn, sweet corn, almost like a kind of like a frosted flake, you get the sweet, you get the corn, but you get the sweetness as well. So it almost kind of has a frosted flake kind of nose to me, which sounds kind of weird to say, but maybe a combination of the corn and the maybe vanilla, the sweetness off the oak. Now, are these American? Well, it's a bourbon, right? So I'm assuming it's American oak, new American oak charred barrels. So
new American oak cask.
But the climate there is so different than Kentucky. So when we went to visit, it was, when was it? Like March. And it was
not during the pandemic, before the pandemic.
So in March 2019, and it was cold, and they have no climate control, and they had the doors open on their rick houses, and it was just whipping. And so those barrels get cold in a way that I can't imagine that the barrels ever get cold in Kentucky. And we think it leads to a really different experience of bourbon. Like, it still tastes like bourbon, but it's not so big. And you get some of those more kind of subtle barrel notes without it being as big, I think.
Yeah. It's funny because I've been sipping on this one, and I'm going back again to that, almost like that rye where I get that finish that seems to keep going. And Matt, I know I kind of jumped ahead there, but it's one thing that kind of sticks out to me. And And it's funny because to me, you said the rye content was 13. Was that right? Did I miss that? I'm sorry.
14. Yeah.
14. Okay, so it's not really like a high rye, but I do pick up the rye spiciness on the palate. Matt, are you picking that up, or?
I'm getting the rye coming through. Excuse me, on the finish especially.
Yeah. We're losing Matt over there.
But I was going back to the nose. I was starting to get cornbread and like a nice buttered cornbread. I think that might be some of like the softness and more of the corn coming through, but not as a grain, but as a product itself was like the baked cornbread and it's sweet too. The sweetness, like a little vanilla, like you were saying, Mark, coming through on the nose as well. And then the palate, it's got, I can taste the strength of it coming through on the barrel. It's definitely higher in proof. And the finish, I picked up that rye on the finish. It's got that nice long heat, but I got a good corn, like a nice cream corn, buttered cream corn on the palate with it, with a little bit of like vanilla and some oak as well.
And these are non-chill filtered, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. All right. And I was going to say that back. I noticed on the notes on your malt that there was no coloring, nothing added to that, because I guess the requirements are different. If I remember correctly, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know a lot about Scotch, but can you add coloring to Scotch or can you add flavoring? I know there's some whiskeys you can add actually both to, and some you can only add flavoring to, but I don't know. Can you add anything to Scotch at all?
The good thing is, I actually don't even know all those details because we would never do it. So I don't even.
Right. Okay. There you go.
Yeah. You can't, I don't think you can to Scotch. You can in blends in the US. And so that's why we wanted to be very clear about that, because that is definitely allowed. And we never add anything. We never chill filter. We may add a little bit of water to bring it down to a proof that we think allows the whiskey to shine. But generally we're not adding a ton, and that's it. It'll just be water.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. So with your barrel, when you guys do these projects now, are you all taking the barrels yourselves and putting them somewhere first, or how does that process actually work? Or do you age barrels yourself at all? I know you don't have a distillery, but do you move them to another location to do anything with?
Yeah. So currently we don't even have a warehouse, but we partner with a distillery to do storage and bottling. So some of these first ones, we didn't do any further aging. We're generally buying casks that the distillery would release on their own. They're mature. Okay. Sometimes we add a year to it because we want to, because we think it'll shine better. But long term, our plan is to have a big warehouse where we can do some cool projects like finishing and get things that are older because one of the cool things that we can do is release things at 7 years, at 8 years, at 10 years when the distilleries may not be able to. We're not doing that yet, but in the long term, that's our goal. But right now, we generally transfer them, and then they don't get more than like a year of extra age at our storage facility. Okay.
All right. So now is your storage facility, Matt said are you in Vermont, right?
We're in Vermont. Yeah. Okay. So for the first releases, we actually worked with Virginia Distillery Company, who is one of the distilleries in our American Vatted Malt for the first couple of bottles. But it became very clear in the pandemic that we needed something more local. I had to do a drive from Vermont to Virginia overnight in the middle of the pandemic, and we decided never again. So we're actually moving bottling to Vermont, to a place where we can be more hands-on and just like easier access for me if I need a sample bottle or something like that. And it's also nice to invest in our local community for that.
Sure. So now let me ask you this. Did your friends and family, when you said, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to decide, we're going to do this thing that nobody really has done here in the United States, and we're just really excited about it. Did people look at you and think, wait a second, what are you going to do?
There was a lot of that.
Yeah. There was a small subset who got it. Like a lot of my friends that worked in wine and spirits retail, they were like, yes, we've been waiting for this. But then most of our non-industry friends, and our families were like, what are you talking about? You're going to drive around the country for 8 months visiting distilleries. You're going to put all of your stuff into storage and quit your jobs to do this thing that we don't even understand. There was some mixed responses to that.
But then it's so good when we started out in New York. We drove across the country, got engaged in Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. We're a couple.
We are married. Yes. Makes the travel a lot easier. Yeah.
Congratulations. Yeah.
After
Nice.
that, we made it to Washington, and one of the first distilleries we went to was Copperworks in Seattle. And I knew a lot of people from my Whiskey Advocate days, but I didn't know them. I never met them. I never had the chance to before. So I sent them a cold email, and the email I got back was like, I have been waiting for someone to do this for years. Please come in and taste some of our whiskey. And that alone told us that, like, okay, there's room for this now. If the distillers are ready for it, if they want there to be an independent bottler, then it can happen. Yeah. So that was really exciting for us.
Despite what our friends and family said, we were like, all right, this is a thing. It's now officially a thing.
Yeah, because see, if you'd come to me as an attorney, I would have said, no, you don't want to do this because I am the dream crusher, and I've told so many other people that have come to me with the ideas that they want to do something, not to do it, and then they turn around and they become very, very successful at it. So if I tell you not to do a business venture, then you should probably do it because you'll end up being very successful at it. But yeah, I can imagine that your family's like friends were thinking outside of the industry that didn't necessarily understand what you were doing. I'm sure that was like, wait, what? You're going to do what? So now when you guys traveled the country, did you video? Did you shoot videos? Did you do stuff? I mean, you guys could have made this into like this could have been like a killer YouTube show that you could have turned into some great like on the Discovery Channel or the History Channel or something like that.
See, why couldn't you told us that 2 years ago?
we took a lot of photos. I mean, the great thing for us is we're going to be, as soon as the pandemic lets us, we're going to be back on the road, and we're always going to be on the road. And we do have plans to start doing videos and stuff now that we know, because one of the interesting things for us when we went is we didn't really know if this was going to work. As Adam said, we ran all the numbers. We spent about 1.5 years, 2 years running numbers and making sure that what we wanted to do was legally possible in the US. And we got all that way. And then we went, well, now we have to see if people will actually sell us whiskey. So when we left, we like took a leap of faith and went on the road to go talk to distillers, and we thought it was going to be a long pitching process and it would take a while to kind of cultivate those relationships. But we were lucky, and they said, let's do it. And then that's when we started all of a sudden being able to buy barrels. And so we wish we had thought of videos at the time, but we had other priorities, but do plan to do stuff in the future. Yeah,
I was going to say, as your attorney, I advise you to on the next road trip, once things open back up, you guys need to hone the video skills and put some footage together, because that would be a pretty incredible type of a show. I mean, people would love it, and you're going to get exposure for these distilleries. Obviously that's what you're doing through your releases. But for people to actually be able to see the distilleries and see the people and see the process and see what they do, I mean, that'd be really cool. I'm just going to throw that out there.
So will your releases, you said quarterly, you're going to be coming out with a malt, a rye, and a bourbon, correct?
Yeah,
that's correct. Blend every now and then. Originally the plan was every year, but with the pandemic, it's all, you know how it is. Yeah. So if people want to know what we're coming out with next, you can do join our newsletter at lostlanternwhiskey.com and see stuff on there. Got to get my plug in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. As a writer, you've got to plug the write. Are you still, so do you still write for Whiskey Advocate, or do you still write for anybody else, or?
I don't write for Whiskey Advocate anymore. I felt like it was too much of a conflict of interest to be reviewing whiskeys and then also telling them I want to buy whiskey from you. Felt a little weird to me. So I just went out on my own. I do a little freelancing every now and then just to
pay the bills. Yeah.
keep that skill set going. And because I love it, I love whiskey from all over the world, as we both do. And that's one thing I wanted to emphasize is our first whiskeys come from all over the country, but we love Kentucky whiskey too. We love bourbon. We love Kentucky rye. We'll have some in our lineup eventually. But what we want to say is like, people already know those. We don't need to introduce those big names to people. We want to introduce the places that haven't gotten their name out there in quite the same way and help people discover those.
Yeah, and we think these whiskeys are very well worth drinking along with the ones that everyone already has on their shelf.
Yeah. So what was it that made you all decide on Cedar Ridge? Just because they are the kind of like the heart of the Corn Belt? And I mean, was that really what kind of drove it? Or
well, we were also really excited to put a release out from them at Cask Strength, because up until probably like 9 months ago, their bourbon was being released at 80 proof. And whiskey nerds, it's just not, people don't pay attention to something at 80 proof, and they don't like it tastes watered down if you're used to drinking something at 120. And so we thought a lot of people weren't drinking it in a way that was for whiskey nerds. And so we were super excited because you got a chance to taste some of their stuff at Cask Strength even before this project. And we were really, really excited about it. So it was really important. A lot of these distillers in this first group are personally important for the project, and were distilleries that we went out even before we did our great road trip and knew that we wanted to try to get them in a form like this at Cask Strength that will speak to whiskey nerds.
Yeah. So as you were going around visiting with people, did you have people that just looked at you and like, we're not going to do that. We have no interest. I mean, did that happen?
We got one or two. Some people were like, this is really cool. I want to do it. I just don't have any barrels to spare right now. And that makes sense, because a lot of these places make like 200 or 300 barrels a year compared to 200 or 300 barrels a day in Kentucky. We got one or two where they were like, you want to take our whiskey and put your name on it and our name on it? What are you talking about? Get out of here.
But it was really not very less common than we expected. We had really braced ourselves for a lot of people to look at us like we were crazy, and it was few and far between.
My favorite experiences honestly are when we go into a distillery and they're totally stone faced, and we go up to their office and they grill us for like 20 minutes or an hour or longer than that, and just like asking us like every question about our business and what we're doing and why and what we're going to do to their whiskey. And we're like, in my head, I'm like, oh my God, they hate us. Why do they even have us in? And at the end, they're like, yeah, we'll sell you some whiskey.
We respect people who care enough to put us through the ringer before they're willing to say yes to us putting their name on the label. And it's a good challenge. But.
And it's a big ask from us. We're a brand new company. We, as you said, we started in 2018, but our first whiskeys came out in fall 2020. So it's a big ask to let us use their name on our label along with ours. So we want to make sure that we're going to treat their whiskey right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, from what you're putting out and what you're doing, the way you're doing it, it seems to me that you are, and like I said earlier, it's the transparency is extremely unique and very, very appreciated. And I'm sure that whiskey, especially bourbon and rye drinkers, would appreciate because we do see bottles that come out with a label and it says distilled in, Indiana, Tennessee, and Kentucky or wherever. And it's like, okay, where'd it come from? Who is it? Who made this? So we can guess, obviously. But I mean, it's really just a kind of a breath of fresh air to see somebody saying, hey, this is, we're going to put this out on our label, but this is where it came from. And this is who's doing it. So it's good for you guys, but good for the distilleries as well, obviously. So
it's also nice to have two reputable voices saying that here are small distilleries that we stand behind. Here's exactly everything about their product, age, mash bill. It's all on the label, their name, where you can find them. You should try this. It's a cool way for like you, both Nora and Adam, for both of you to look at the end consumer and say, here, this, you may have never heard of this place, but you should try this because they really, really do have great product. We stand behind it, and here's their whole story. Like we'll introduce you, but here's the distillery. So it's a very, very cool, genuine way for you to stand behind something new and introduce the bourbon, whiskey, rye, Scotch community to it.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree. So let's talk at the important stuff. Where can people find what you guys are putting out, and where can they get it?
Yeah, so we're doing something totally new for now. We're actually it's only sold online right now.
Okay.
All of the details because of we launched in the middle of the pandemic because we're crazy. So we decided that instead of trying to launch in stores and bars, we wanted, because things were set up that didn't exist 6-9 months ago. We are selling on the access is basically through partner retailers that ship to people, but it's an online interface. So the way to find our whiskey is just to go to our website, lostlanternwhiskey.com. We do have plans to go into brick and mortar kind of stores and bars this year, but a lot of it is when bars are open again and stores are able to take on new products. So it's really, we'll do it as soon as we can. But for the time being, the nice thing is we are working with partner retailers that ship to 40 states. And that would have been possible before we were planning on being in Kentucky, New York, and California.
Right.
So
right. Well,
that's the fun of it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, 40 states, that's a lot of places for a brand new startup company to be able to say, you can get our stuff, even going through online, but that's great that you can get that out to 40 states.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. So can we talk pricing with regard to, we didn't talk about that. So I'm sure our people would kind of like to know what kind of price range we're talking about on the products, if you're comfortable with that.
Fine. It's out there. It is what we're selling it for. So the American Vatted Malt is $120. It is on the high end, but it's because we got those crazy special barrels in them.
Right.
The Cedar Ridge Bourbon is $87, and the New York Distilling Company Rye is $70.
Okay. Which, I mean, for a cask strength, rye and bourbon, that's not, I don't see that being out of line at all. So that sounds good to me. So where can people find information? I think you guys had talked earlier about the website. What was that? What's the address on that?
LostLanternWhiskey.com. Right now it's somewhat limited information. So if people want more info, they should just email us. We like answering really nerdy questions. So there's a contact form on our website, and people should feel free to do that. In early February, we will have a full new website that has really detailed barrel details. So if you don't want to interact with us, just wait until February and everything should be there. And it will be, even with the blend, it's barrel details on all 12 of the barrels that went into that.
Okay. Yeah, cool. So now we know you didn't do videos. We've already discussed that. But social media, what about that? People can find you guys there as well.
Our main social media is Instagram, and that's just at Lost Lantern Whiskey on Instagram. Okay. A little bit on Twitter, but primarily Instagram.
Yeah, Twitter is just,
it's hard.
It's not. Yeah, it's not a place. I was talking to somebody else here in Kentucky today about growing their brand and whatnot, and he's like, well, we got a Twitter. And I'm like, why? It's like, you're not going to grow a whiskey brand necessarily on Twitter. It's just not the place to do it. So I think I think the Bourbon Life has a Twitter, but I don't think we ever posted anything on Twitter. So, well, we've reached the end of the session 3 here. So, but before we do wrap it up, Matt, what are your final thoughts on this bourbon? What do you think?
I like it. It's got that really nice heat on the finish, and the softness of the nose with the corn, that cornbread, that nice baked baked corn and cream corn taste. This really does help to show the corn coming through and shining, and then getting some of the barrel as well. Some of the vanillas coming through, a little bit of the age on the barrel. So a little bit of the oak and a little bit of the charred flavor as well, but it's good. This is good. It's got a really nice high proof on it too. So
yeah, and that's what surprised me. The proof being at 120, because a lot of times when you say that, you think, oh my gosh, it's going to be hot, or people think it's going to drink really hot. Mm-hmm. And this did not drink. People talk about the Kentucky hug, where it just burns your esophagus all the way down, and I did not get really that Kentucky hug where it burned going down. I got that nice spiciness in my mouth, on the tongue, and the roof of my mouth, which was really nice, and combined with that sweetness as well. So yeah, to me, it was really a really good bourbon. So congratulations to you guys. Yeah. And to Cedar Ridge for
Cedar Ridge,
yeah, for putting that out. So good job. We're gonna definitely check them out. And that's what's really cool, because now not only do people want to find more about you all and what you're going to be doing, but also the different distilleries that you're working with.
Yeah.
It's kind of a nice way for people to be like, oh, wait, I need to check those guys. I know Matt's going to get online and check out the New York Distilling Rock and Rye. That's like number one.
Absolutely, I am.
Oh my gosh. Well, I tell you what, before we wrap stuff up here, Nora, Adam, you guys want to add anything to what we've talked about tonight?
I think we've covered a lot of ground and gone way over time 3 times in a row. So
we'll leave it at that. Yeah.
But you're in Vermont. What else are you going to do, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's dark at 4.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so 1.5 feet of snow. You're not going to be able to go out anywhere. Pandemic. I mean, exactly. So what? It's an hour and a half. We're all good with that, right? Matt, what about you before we close it up here?
Oh, Nora and Adam, thank you all so much for taking the time to sit down with us and talk about Lost Lantern. And I had not really ever heard of an independent bottler in the U.S. And so it's really cool. I really, really think that this is an awesome thing that you all are doing. It makes perfect sense to me. And it's such a great way for you all to help smaller distilleries that are certainly worth it get their name out, and to showcase them and also showcase your palates and your talents at picking, blending, and being a part of really great whiskey, bourbon, rye, scotch. And thank you so much for sharing all the samples with us. We had a really great time tonight.
Well, thank you for having us. Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, very well said, Matt. I agree with that. And yeah, thank you, Nora, Adam. Thank you both for being with us. And maybe changing my mind about single malts.
Yeah.
I'm on, at least I'm on the fence now. I went from the other side to get up on the fence. So
take it.
Yeah. I'm close. So, but no, that was really good. We really appreciate it. Had a really good time talking with you guys tonight. I do need to thank our sponsors again before we get it out of here. So again, the Stave Restaurant out there in Millville, Kentucky. Check them out online at the Stave Kentucky. Again, they are closed for renovations and some updates right now, but they'll be open at the beginning of February. So check them out. Give them a visit. They're great people. Rebecca and Eric Burnworth out there. Again, they're located between Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve Distillery on McCracken Pike. So it's really conveniently located if you're on the Bourbon Trail. And then also 3 Chord Bourbon up in Michigan. Those guys are just putting out some great stuff. Ari Sussman, the master blender and distiller. It's just, I call him a mad scientist, the things that he manages to put together and put out. So they've got their rye, they've got a bourbon, they've got the 12 Bar Reserve, which probably, I think was one of our biggest surprise bourbons of the year, Matt, for 2020. They also had the Whiskey Drummer that they put out the 15 year. So check them out online at 3chordbourbon.com. And with that said, I'm going to wrap us up, send us home with our tagline, which is, may your glasses always be full, and may you keep on living the bourbon life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Our mission at the Bourbon Life is simple: to share our passion for all things bourbon with you every week. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we're doing. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. You can also contact us by email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. And you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a moment, we'd love it if you would rate us and give us a review. So until next week, we hope your glass is always full and that you keep on living the bourbon life.